So yeah, today we'll be talking about Cptsd and how we can recover from Cptsd. So first of all, we have to have an understanding of what complex trauma is. So in order to know what complex trauma is, we have to understand what trauma is. And the reality is that most don't know what trauma is. And not only is the average person not educated on what trauma is, even those who are professionals in the industry have a hard time defining trauma. Trauma can be different for different people. So it's not what happens to you that is the trauma. For instance, a person can get in a car accident, and for some people, the next day they're driving on the road again. For the same car accident, another person will say, I can never drive again. As a result, they are traumatized. Or in short form, we may say, well, they have trauma from their experience. So what really is trauma? What defines trauma? So trauma is going to be anything that makes a change in a person where that change is undesirable. So when you have something that happens to you, it may or may not change you. And if it does change you, then that change has to be an undesirable change in order for that to be able to be classified as trauma. Also, the event is normally in some way dysregulating. But when we get into complex trauma, we're not talking about one specific event anymore. We're talking about complex trauma in terms of multiple things have happened over a long period of time. So if you've had multiple traumas, then you have complex trauma. And so we've been throwing around words like empath, toxic empath. So when we talk about the word empath, we're taking a term from pop psychology and we're applying it broadly to persons who, though they may have undergone trauma, they haven't lost their empathy. And they rely more on their empathic side because their thinking is split. They tend to take the loss or sacrifice and do things to the detriment of the self in order to survive in everyday or social situations. Whereas on the other hand, you have the toxic empath, who is an empath that is unhealed from their trauma. And so they're doing things that are to the detriment of themselves. They may be so extreme in their thinking that when they experience something that is turbulent in their relationships, they start to view the person as totally bad, a totally awful person. And if they're not viewing a person like that, then they tend to idealize the person. They're going to deal with conflict by extremely being fighting and adversarial, raising their voice, becoming violent, having violent thoughts, or they do the total opposite and they run, they hide, and they flee from situations. Sometimes because they're afraid of the person, but a lot of times because they're afraid of their own response. They're afraid of their own emotions. And so they don't know how to keep their own emotions regulated, which is one of the main symptoms of complex trauma. So there are many symptoms of complex trauma. We're not going to be able to discuss them all tonight, but we'll touch on some of them so you can kind of identify what it is you're dealing with, because whether you're an empath or a toxic empath, or if you were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder, at the core, you are a trauma survivor. And we find that Cptsd is like that starting point, that gateway into so many other mental illnesses and emotional difficulties. So I want to make very clear to you what Cptsd is, but how to heal from it, how to get out of it. So that should be crystal clear for you today by the end of our talk. So some of the symptoms that you'll notice if you have Cptsd, which stands for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, will include, but are not limited to, the following: re-experiencing the traumatic event. This is going to come through in flashbacks, intrusive memories, nightmares, feeling as if the traumatic event is happening again, an emotional flashback where you feel like you're back there again in the trauma that you experienced as a prisoner of war or as a person who grew up with narcissistic abusive parents or a person who grew up with neglectful parents. So when you get that re-experiencing, that is a symptom of complex trauma. Rumination is another way of re-experiencing the trauma again. So you're just sitting there, but you're thinking again and again and again about how horrible it was what this person did to you, or how horrible it was what you did to the other person, or how horrible it was that this, and you just keep replaying the embarrassing event or the painful event. And what does this do? Well, this puts you into negative emotions because you're in a negative thinking state. So how do we heal this? How do we heal this? Well, we have to teach you as a survivor how to live in the present and in the future, not from a standpoint of fearing what's going to happen in the future, but from a standpoint of being an architect and being a constructor of your future life, understanding that you have the greatest influence over what your life can be. Being grounded in the moment helps you to stay out of the intrusive nightmares, memories, the traumatic events, and teaching you how to heal your anxiety helps you so that you don't keep being led by your emotions back into these places. Helping you to defuse your triggers is going to help you to not go back into the re-experiencing and the flashbacks. The second symptom we're going to talk about is avoidance. So those with complex trauma tend to be avoidant. They try to avoid their triggers. They try to avoid places that remind them of certain things. They try to avoid people. Instead of feeling like they have the tools and the skills they need to engage with their fellow man, they want to avoid social situations often. They want to avoid activities that bring back distressing memories. They have avoidant behavior in their own life, even when they're alone, because they try to distract themselves from their own thoughts. So they avoid their own emotions and they avoid their own thoughts. So they've got the TV going. If they're alone, they got the music playing. They can go for a run, a jog. They can go for a drive, but they never want to just sit and be alone with themselves. They've always got to be talking on the phone with someone or doing something that distracts them. That is avoidance. It's a symptom of complex trauma. So how do we heal this? Well, again, we just have to learn. If we are the survivor, if you're the clinician, then you have to teach the client how to diffuse the triggers, how to actually confront situations, having the skills of assertiveness, how to confront their own feelings, having the skills of mindfulness, how to resolve their own anxiety, how to resolve their own sadness and depression, how to get away from distraction and stay away from things that can be potentially addictive. As far as the distressing memories, we have to help the client to be able to reprocess their distressing memories. So we use reprocessing tools such as VIP, which is where you're reframing things to a victory story, to how you're still important, and focusing on your personal power. The third symptom that we'll discuss is hyperarousal, feeling constantly on edge or being easily startled or being irritable or having difficulty sleeping. I include in this anxiety, which we'll talk more about later, but hyperarousal is related to hypervigilance. So in relationships, you're constantly watching what people are saying, what people are doing. And this is where those who are labeled as empaths feel like they may have a gift because they've become so adept at watching everyone all the time, that they feel like they have a special intuition for understanding people, but really they're just hyper vigilant. It is not a special gift. They've developed a skill, but it's not magic. It's a symptom of being a trauma survivor or an abuse survivor. So we pull people out of hyperarousal by teaching them how to resolve their own anxiety and teaching them how to use stop, be still, be thoughtful, be observant, be patient. The fourth symptom is emotional dysregulation. So trauma survivors feel these intense emotional bouts or swings that come over them, and they don't know how to control their emotions. They are afraid of their emotions. So they become afraid of feeling fear. They become afraid of feeling guilt, afraid of feeling anxiety, afraid of feeling anger. They're afraid of feeling sad. And this is happening why? Because they don't have the skills, they don't have the tools to understand how to regulate the self. The trauma has hyper-enlarged the amygdala, and they are locked in a state of constant trauma because they grew up in complex trauma, right? Or they were held as a prisoner of war or in a toxic abusive relationship with a narcissist for so long that their mind is in this constant state of trauma. And that puts them into emotional dysregulation, as well as all of these symptoms are a result of being in that constant state of trauma. Again, when we teach people how to resolve their own depression, how to resolve their own anger, how to reframe things, then they no longer suffer from emotional dysregulation. Dissociation is the ability to go into a trance, almost like falling asleep while you're still awake, or to separate from your body mentally, or to feel disconnected from yourself, from your surroundings, from the other people in your surroundings, to daydream, to zone out. These are forms of dissociation. This is a trauma survival technique that's developed as a child. It's a form of freezing. So there's no way to fight as a child. You can't run away as a child. So you learn to dissociate, where your body is still there, but you've gone numb, or you've left the building mentally. And then people call you a space cadet, and they say that there's something wrong with you, and you get labeled with ADHD, which as an adult, you're still experiencing this disconnection, this dissociation. But really, this is because you grew up in a traumatic, tumultuous, unstable environment. So how do we cure dissociation? Well, we have to learn to reframe dissociation as a superpower. Dissociation is a superpower. And then we need to harness that power, like a mutant would learn to harness the power in Professor X's school. You need to learn to use your superpower at the right times and not just rely on it at all times, and thus miss things that are very important. You need the tools to cope with the symptoms of ADHD. And then you will learn that it's not a bad thing that you have the ability to disconnect. It just needs to be used at the right time. The sixth one we'll discuss is negative self-perception. Trauma survivors feel persistent low self-esteem, shame, guilt, negative beliefs about themselves as a result of trauma. So we have to teach trauma survivors about their actual worth in the universe. We have to teach trauma survivors how to love themselves. We have to teach trauma survivors how to ask propitious questions and aggrandize the self, and how to have a strong narcissistic defense in order to get them out of this. The seventh we'll discuss is disturbed relationships. Relationships are really hard for those in complex trauma. This is for a variety of reasons, but remember, their first primary relationship was an abusive one. So someone who was bigger and stronger than them basically bullied them. So trust issues are pervasive for complex trauma survivors. They go around not trusting anyone. They say, I don't trust anyone. And so they have push-pull relationships where they feel really clingy and then they run away, or they may be totally avoidant. It's going to manifest itself differently in each person. They grew up without a clear sense of boundaries. So the boundaries were either that their parents were super strict and that was unhealthy, or the parents were punishing inconsistently and that was unhealthy, or the parents expected the child to have no boundaries, the child could have no privacy, nothing to themselves. And of course, all of these things damage their sense of what boundaries are. And as a result, they end up being taken advantage of again and again in relationships, or being the type to take advantage of others and not respect the boundaries of others, or both. So how do we help survivors to heal from this? Well, we have to teach them what boundaries are, like a university course, and help them to learn the skills of assertiveness. Now, how we do those things, I'll go more into detail on. But the eighth one is chronic feelings of emptiness, feeling a persistent sense of emptiness. You'll hear your survivors often mention feeling like they don't know what their purpose is, or feeling stuck is a common feeling. Saying, I feel stuck. I don't know where I'm going. I lack direction. And this is a cousin to loss of self. I don't know who I am. We cure this by helping them to learn how to live life in purpose, how to find their purpose in life. And when a trauma survivor finds a purpose in life, then they no longer feel that emptiness, meaninglessness, loss of self, but they know who they are. And we teach them how to construct the self rather than trying to search for themselves somewhere in their past. And the ninth one is difficulty with self-regulation, managing emotions, impulses, self-control, self-destructive behavior, substance abuse, self-harm. All these things are a part of the symptoms of complex trauma. So what happens when a trauma survivor enrolls in our healing program is they're basically learning how to regulate the self, which is where we help you to appoint your conscious mind as the CEO of the self. And the conscious mind can now take the lead over the subconscious mind. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So as number 10, I mentioned anxiety again, because anxiety is persistent and pervasive for the entire life of a trauma survivor, as well as they usually also will struggle with depression as well. So one of the first things we do is heal their anxiety, heal their depression, show them how they can heal it for themselves. We empower them with our tools so that they can really do therapy on themselves every day, because we can't be there for them every day. And then loss of self is, as we talked about with feeling that sense of emptiness, meaninglessness. Trauma survivors do so much people pleasing that they lose track of who they actually are. So how do we heal all this? In order to heal complex post-traumatic stress disorder, we have to unchange the brain, or rechange the brain, if you will, because trauma changes the brain. It's just that simple. That's for all of us. When we go through a traumatic event, it switches your brain into a trauma mode. This is very similar to how your phone can get switched into an emergency mode when you dial 911. It shuts off all the other functions of the phone so that only the main functions that are necessary to cope with the emergency and to be helpful in that emergency are the ones that are functioning where the energy is really flowing to. Likewise, when you experience a trauma, the brain switches into a different mode, which is trauma mode, where it shuts down and diverts energy and blood away from the parts of the brain that are not totally necessary for immediate survival. So your hippocampus is going to lose blood and energy. Your cerebral cortex is going to lose blood and energy. Your prefrontal cortex, and now as a result, everything is going to the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional center, fight, flight, freeze, immediate response, and anxiety. That's what the amygdala is all about, or intense pain. So it responds just to pain, pleasure, fight, flight, freeze. And so what happens now, you're living your life just according to pain, pleasure, fear, feelings. And then you're feeling so strange, like you're living life like a squirrel when you're supposed to be a human. And that's exactly what has happened, because you've reverted back to your animal brain. We got to get you out of the animal brain into the canopy. Your sophisticated prefrontal cortex allows you to house your sophisticated consciousness and your free will. So you have to be empowered. So we got to switch your mind out of trauma mode back into conscious functioning, deliberate functioning, so that you are once again the CEO of the self, and you are leading the self again, instead of being led by the feelings, led by the emotions. So we're going to literally go in and change the brain. Well, we don't literally go in, but we are going to literally change the brain. We're going to do this by shrinking the amygdala and strengthening the prefrontal cortex again. The way that we do that is by teaching the conscious self, you, to be the leader of the self. You need to learn, you need to have the tools, and you need the confidence in order to do this. In my opinion, the best place to get those tools is in my trauma healing course. So inside the trauma healing course, you learn step by step how to address the symptoms of complex trauma, so that you, the conscious person, are in charge, and the amygdala can learn to take a backseat and to submit to you. So you learn about anxiety and rumination, and specifically how to heal anxiety and rumination in yourself. So you take your time, you learn the process, and then you apply the process in your life. So every time you feel anxiety, you should go back and use the tools. The main tool you're going to use is the JOT method, J-O-T. Now, as you go back and you use the JOT method for your anxiety, you go do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. You're already retraining the brain to default to this conscious mind, logical way of thinking. As a result, you come out of living in constant anxiety. You learn how to stop and cease the rumination. And we're already growing the cortex and shrinking the amygdala. The next lesson in the healing course is depression. What is it? How do you heal it? Same thing. You learn what it is, then you learn how to actually cure the depression. Yes, by using the JOT method, you can go through a process every time you feel depressed of pulling yourself out of the depression. When you see that you have the power to pull yourself out of depression, you have the power to pull yourself out of anxiety, suddenly you, the conscious person, are in control, and the amygdala, the subconscious brain, takes a back seat, which is how it should be. Emotions are important, but emotions are not to be the boss of us. They're not to be the leader. So it's by teaching yourself how to be the leader of the self, allowing your logical mind to guide you, your higher mind to guide you. That is how you reach healing. We help you learn in terms of loss of self, which is the next part in the healing course, how to find the self, which is not so much searching for the self, but it's learning to recreate who you want to be. Because the true self is not in your past, although your other trauma counselors may have told you that. That's because they didn't learn the truth. The true self is not in your past. It is true that when you were a kid, you were probably by default somewhat authentic, but the authenticity is replaced by authentic fear. And so when you're living in fear, it is true. That is your true self. When your whole life becomes a trauma response, that is your true self now. We need to change that person and build a new self. And we need to build it according to who we want to be. Because I can assure you, anyone that you admire, whether it's a historical figure like Jesus or Martin Luther King, or it's a pop celebrity like Beyonce or Barack Obama, whoever you look at and you say, I'm inspired by that person, I can assure you they built the self. It is not just that as they came out, they're just like their authentic self as a kid and they stayed exactly the same way. That's not how it works. They had a vision of the future. They pick and chose what they wanted to be, and then they became that. They reached out and they put the work forward into becoming that because they're led in the conscious mind. When we're in the trauma mind, we can't think about our purpose. We can't think about what we're trying to do, where we're trying to go, what we're trying to be. We can't build ourselves. Why? Because we're just trying to survive day by day. And so we have to get you out of the basic survival way of thinking and get you into higher mind thinking so that you can actually start to make a difference in your life and in the lives of others. Next, we go into relationships and boundaries. And so we teach you about trauma bonds, how to cut those off, how to cut off the toxic relationships, how to protect yourself by setting boundaries. What are the skills of evading an argument? What are the skills of assertiveness? How to overcome people pleasing? And by getting these skills, now you can approach relationships with confidence. And this is a big part for me of the healing process for trauma survivors. I want them to not be afraid of relationships anymore, but to go in understanding that they are an equal person to everyone else that they encounter. You're no better. You're no worse. You're just another person. Then we have to address the extreme thinking by learning how to think critically and nuanced. So when someone has borderline personality disorder or any variants of complex trauma, they suffer from extreme thinking, which is called splitting in psychology, which means that basically their way of surviving is to see things as good, bad, black, white. You got to think of a child. He either sees you as dangerous or a friend. It's one or the other. And so that's how he stays safe. You're either a bad guy or a good guy. The extreme thinking can cause us complications in our life, our relationship, and we need to cure it in order to heal. And so the trauma healing course helps us to address that. And then we get into building the higher self and cool stuff, learning about ethics and personal power and compassion for ourselves and others, and intelligence, wisdom, and the manifestations of good energy. So we're adding new things into this trauma healing course all the time. But the healing course is about $40 for a month of access, whereas meeting with me in person is going to be about $100 for 1 hour. So we set the healing course here because anything I'm going to tell you in person is already in the healing course. So we're trying to give you the cheat code so you can just get all the goodies, get all the information without having to spend as much money to do so. So using the healing course, we're pulling you out of trauma mode and reswitching that brain into conscious mind, self-leadership, self-empowerment. We have other tools that are helping with this as well. You got your live meetings. That's what we're in right now. Wednesday night, Monday night. You have your one-on-ones with me or your trauma specialists. Again, the trauma specialists on the website that are available are trained by me. I swear by them. I trust them. They're amazing. I have a book that takes you through the same process that the healing course takes you through. So the book is available on Amazon. You can go through chapter by chapter. It has an exercise at the end of almost every chapter. Do the exercises, heal yourself. These tools are being made available to you to empower you. It's also available in Kindle format as well. And then you need your basic maintenance for your brain, which is 30 minutes a day exercise, 30 minutes a day edification, 30 minutes a day meditation. So let me just explain a little bit of what these are, because we hear them, we think we know what we're talking about, but then we actually don't. The book was called Mind, M-I-N-D. It's on Amazon by Roman Zanoni. So meditation, when we say 30 minutes a day of meditation, we're not talking about clearing your mind or breathing. We're talking about pausing and thinking. Pausing and thinking. Meditation is to pause and to think. You're purposely utilizing, bringing online the prefrontal cortex, the large part of the brain. This is the part that is emotionally regulated, that is wise, that is thoughtful, that is critical in thinking. This is the part we need to stimulate. This is the part we need to activate. This pulls us out of trauma mode. That is what meditation is used for. Don't do clearing mind meditations, not for healing. That's not going to help you in healing. Don't try to sit for a long period of time. The 30 minutes of meditation is cumulative, meaning I just need you to give me 30 minutes of meditation total throughout the day. You can do 3 minutes here, 2 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, and it adds up to 30 minutes. That will be fine, but it needs to be on a daily basis. 30 minutes of meditation is a minimum for maintaining your brain. This is not only while you're healing. No. This is for the rest of your life. You always do meditation of some type. Now, there's lots of different ways to meditate. It's not as daunting as you may think. Again, just pausing for 7 seconds before you speak is a form of meditation. You have mindfulness meditation, which is connecting to the body, connecting to your present moment, observing what's around you in the present moment. That's a form of meditation. You can do a mindfulness meditation for 2 or 3 minutes. Bam, you got some meditation in. Gratitude meditation. Think of 3 things that you're grateful for. Pause and think about each one for just a minute. You got 3 to 5 minutes of meditation in right there. Do that every morning. At night before you go to bed, visualization. Every night you should be creating a vision of the future, conjuring it up in your mind, and dreaming about it as one of the last things you think about before you go to bed. How beautiful everything's going to be when you achieve your dreams, when you get everything you want. You're creating this glorious vision of the future, something that's possible, something that's obtainable. And as a result, what do you think is going to happen? Well, of course, your mind's going to continue to work on that subconsciously, and it's going to wonder why you're not there every day, and it's going to help to pull you toward that. Stop, S-T-O-P, being still, being thoughtful, being observant, being patient. That is a tool. It is a meditation. It is a form of meditation. Takes a couple of minutes to get through it. 5 minutes right there of meditation. When should we meditate? When you're learning something new. So if you're watching one of my videos, reading a book, hear a good point. Oh, that was really good. I like that. Pause, put the book down, meditate on it. You don't eat food without chewing it. Meditation is the digestive part of the edification. So we need to chew on what we're eating. Don't just read something good. You read a Bible scripture. Oh, that was so good. Then you close the book and forget about it. Don't do that. Meditate on it. Make it connect in your brain to other parts of your life. How will I use this in my future? How can I use this to help myself? How can I become better? How can I let this change me? What's the lesson here? What am I supposed to learn? How can I help others with this? So we need to meditate on what we learn. Also, it will be easy to get your 30 minutes in of meditation if every single time you have a negative emotion, you take the moment to meditate. You can do mindfulness meditation. You can do the jot method, which is also a meditation where you're journaling on a piece of paper. Again, meditate every single time you have a negative emotion. Meditate. So that's what I mean when I say 30 minutes of meditation. 30 minutes of edification is what you read, watch, and listen to that elevates the mind. That's edification. Watch my videos. Watch some TED Talks. Read some psychology books or listen to the speakers. Stuff that's going to elevate your thinking, your knowledge, your understanding. Stuff that's positive, that's upbuilding to the self. 30 minutes a day minimum of edification. 30 minutes a day physical exercise. I am talking about walking out of your house, walking one direction for 15 minutes, walk back 15 minutes. Every single day, do something like that. Hit some sit-ups right in your house, do some push-ups right in your house, go to a gym, work with a personal trainer, watch some workout videos, but actually do the things they're doing and don't just watch. That's exercise. You got to move the body. You got to connect to your body, got to move the body. It's an important part. Stretching is an important part. Breathing is an important part of your healing. So connect to the body. Now you can combine edification and exercise. You can be listening to one of my recordings while you're on a treadmill for 30 minutes. Absolutely. So you got a time-saving method right there. When you do all that, you will heal from your complex trauma. And it is that simple.